When you check out at the pharmacy, you see the journey from idea to medicine, thanks to our intellectual property system, or IP for short. IP safeguards inventions, like a new way to prevent seizures or lower cholesterol. And IP supports competition from other brands, then lower-cost generics, which are 90% of prescriptions filled in the U.S. Innovation, competition, lower costs, thanks to IP. Learn more at phrma.org/IP works wonders.
You don't wake up dreaming of McDonald's fries. You wake up dreaming of McDonald's hash browns. McDonald's breakfast comes first. Ba-da-ba-ba-ba.
I'm Julia Turner, and this is the Slate Culture Gabfest. Cate Blanchett is a Sexy Super Spy edition. It's Wednesday, March 19th, 2025, and on today's show, we're talking about Black Bag, the taut new spy thriller from director Steven Soderbergh that's light on gun battles and heavy on badinage. Then Deli Boys is a goofy new crime caper on Hulu, featuring the exploits of two sons who discover, after their Pakistani immigrant father dies, that his successful chain of Philly area delis was actually a front for a thriving cocaine business. Finally, the book that changed the way we think about memoir has turned 25. We'll talk with Dan Kois about his piece on Dave Eggers' A Heartbreaking Work of Staggering Genius. Joining me today is Dana Stevens. Welcome back, Dana.
Hey, nice to be back.
We missed you. And in for Steve Metcaff is Dan Kois himself. Hello, Dan.
Nicely foreshadowed.
Yeah. They thought you were a special guest, but lo, you're a co-host. Ha ha ha.
We turned it around on him.
Guys, I don't know if it's possible for me to speak in a sufficiently slinky and controlled tone to talk about this Steven Soderbergh movie, but I'm just going to try and do it in my normal voice, and hopefully people will get the idea. Steven Soderbergh's latest film stars Cate Blanchett and Michael Fassbender as married spies. Fassbender's George has been assigned to ferret out a traitor in the organization. What's the organization? Mystery British Spy Organization. Doesn't really matter. There's a colleague who has pinched some kind of cyber weapon to sell it to someone nefarious. There are 5 suspects, and one of them is his own wife. As the film unspools, we find that it's maybe more about relationships and trust than it is about national security, and the tone is bone dry. Here is a clip in which George and Blanchett's Catherine, who doesn't know she's under suspicion yet, prepare to host the 4 other suspects for dinner at the start of George's investigation.
What are we hunting this time?
Severus.
And you think one of them took it?
Possibly.
It's been a while since we had a traitor to dinner. At least knowingly.
We shouldn't be discussing this.
No, probably not. I would have thought you'd start with polygraphs.
I wanted to try something more elegant first.
What's on the menu?
Fun and games.
Will there be a mess to clean up?
With any luck.
It would be so exhausting if the conversational business of my marriage was conducted in that manner.
Your entire home life was scripted by sexy Harold Pinter.
What they don't reveal there is that he's spiked one of the dishes at the dinner with truth serum, and so that first dinner gets pretty exciting. Dana, what did you make of this latest from our marvelously prolific and competent hero of Hollywood, Steven Soderbergh?
I'm so sorry to say this, but this movie was a big disappointment for me, and I could not have gone into it with a more open heart. In fact, exactly what I wanted is what this movie purports to be, what the trailer makes it look like it is, what every review, except for a very few online, seemed to think that it was, but which it was not for me, which is a little bit what that scene makes it sound like. That's a very trailer-ready piece of the movie that is probably in the trailer. You think it's going to be slinky badinage and this kind of portrait of a marriage embedded within a twisty spy story. So it's sort of, the premise is sort of the inverse of Mr. and Mrs. Smith. Instead of two spies that are trying to kill each other secretly while pretending they have a good marriage, it's two spies who have this legendarily perfect marriage and would do anything to protect each other from the other sneaky spies all around them. And all of that is great. It's exactly what I wanted. I didn't want a profound movie. I didn't want an original movie. I just wanted a slick, sexy spy thriller that would entertain me for 2 hours. And I didn't find it to be that. I found this movie dull. The spy world that it set up was so not believable and thinly sketched that I didn't care much about the spy plot. And most important of all, this marriage that's supposed to be the envy of every other spy. And it's this magical thing where they would do anything for each other. I had no idea what they enjoyed about each other's company. I never saw them seem to like have any fun. And I found the movie kind of dull, even though it's only 93 minutes long. So both of you go ahead and make me feel like someone with no sense of wit or joy, because you both got exactly what the movie wanted to give you out of it.
I don't deny your assertion that the two of them basically have no chemistry. Like, Julie, I'm curious whether you've found that these two chilly pieces of work had chemistry, or if you believed their passionate love. The movie actually kind of makes, I think, like a very bold philosophical argument that even a relationship between two mannequins can be passionate and fulfilling if they just share common interests. But no, I never really particularly believed in the love at the heart of it, but that didn't really stop me from finding the whole thing 90 minutes of twisty, like very sophisticated, quasi-sophisticated, I guess, really, like, fun. And that maybe says something worse about my taste than it does about your taste, that I was willing to let this movie be essentially totally hollow at the center. And the fact that it was simply so craftsman-like in such a Soderberghian way that every scene clicked into every other scene and no scene was longer than it needed to be. And the whole thing was, as you say, 93 minutes, the perfect length for a movie, I was on board.
I'm probably somewhere in between. I wanted to like this so much. I'm such an enormous Soderbergh fan, and particularly Soderbergh in the let me make you a fun caper mode. But the leadenness of their relationship sort of bothered me, and I couldn't quite figure out what it was doing. Like, it's not an accident, obviously. Like, Soderbergh knows how to make things warm and sumptuously erotic if he wants to. So why did he make them leaden mannequins? And I couldn't figure out if it was part of the structure of the suspense, because we're trying to figure out if they actually distrust each other, or if in fact they trust each other so much that when they encounter evidence that maybe they shouldn't trust each other, they immediately leap to the assumption that they're being set up to distrust each other because they couldn't, but they're wondering, like. And the version of it that I thought it was interesting, his name was George, and that there's so many dinner party sequences because it called to mind Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, like sort of
intentionally
this
so.
Post marriage, yeah, definitely, and it was shouted out in a couple of reviews, and yet the like fire and vehemence of what, like, you apart from the fact that they're both very glamorous and handsome, and their home is very lovely. You don't actually really see why the other baby spies around them are like, wow, that's the power couple of the agency. Like, it's very funny that when the young spies come to dinner, they're sort of daunted to go to this, castle of these glamorous lions, and you get why they are. But then the actual performances from these two actors doesn't really pull you in. And I'm curious, Dana, I mean, I haven't seen that I can think of Blanchett and Fassbender together. I'm an enormous admirer of Blanchett, but I'm trying to think if I'm an admirer of her as an actor as much as I am as just like an elegant figure, like she's got such great style, and she's so commanding and self-possessed, like and she almost sort of seems to be embodying that composed character here. What did you make of those two central performances, or their role in the sort of unliveliness of this central couple?
I mean, I don't attribute it to the performances at all. In fact, I think they're embodying exactly what the script asks them to embody, which is this, this sleek impenetrability. And I suppose the whole idea is supposed to be that the other spies admire them because they're sleekly impenetrable. But I mean, unlike Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, there's no peek behind the curtain. Like, it's boring to be sleekly impenetrable at every moment, including when no one is watching you. Who are they even trying to impress anymore? I guess each other. But then why do we admire their marriage? I'm attributing all of this to the script, which is by David Cope, who's worked with Steven Soderbergh a lot in the past and has written some really good scripts, including one for a good movie just this year called Presence, which came out 2 months ago. That's how prolific Steven Soderbergh is. It's his second release of 2025.
Of Q1.
Right? And yeah, the craftsmanship is there. It looks elegant. I mean, he does his own cinematography. He does his own editing. He's all under pseudonyms. He's always done that. And it couldn't be more elegantly put together. But unless this is a movie about the emptiness of the central couple, which I don't think that it thinks that it is, I'm really not sure what the movie's trying to leave us with in the end. And I do think Cate Blanchett can really act, although she often is cast, as you say, Julia, in these roles that require her to be more of a sexy clothes horse than an actual character. But if you think about her, her Bob Dylan in Todd Haynes's Bob Dylan movie, which I can never remember the title of, I'm still here.
I'm still not there anymore.
You're still over there where you were last time.
Yeah.
She's fantastic. And that little segment's the best part of that movie. I'm thinking of this Jim Jarmusch movie called Coffee and Cigarettes. Have either of you seen that movie, an anthology film, where she does a double role. She plays herself and her own cousin, her sort of wannabe cousin who's impressed with her movie star cousin, Cate Blanchett. It's a really, really bravura turn as an actor. Anyway, I'm just citing those to say I'm not at all attributing it to them. I think that they're being exactly the chilly mannequins they were asked to be, but I don't want to see a spy movie about chilly mannequins.
Yeah, and I guess the question is why you would make one. I also think, I'm curious what you guys made of the other performances. I mean, the one place where we do get a little bit of a peek behind the curtain is in the therapist's office. So one of the other 4 spy suspects is like the house shrink, who's played by Naomi Harris, who played Moneypenny in some of the recent Bond films. And there's like a little bit of there's more heat in her kind of aggressive, hostile, psychological cat and mouse game with the therapist than there is in any conversation she has with Michael Fassbender's George. But of that other quartet, the person who really flies off the screen is Marissa Abella, who plays the young data analyst Clarissa. She's most recently seen holding down the screen in Industry. But I thought that the other 4 performances, which were kind of universally admired in a lot of the reviews I read, I thought were pretty wildly uneven. And I thought that Marissa Abella was fabulous in this. And all of her scenes seemed to be from the fun movie I wish I was watching and have like a charge of real desire and envy and fun. And I thought Regé-Jean Page as this kind of like up and coming, ambitious young spy was like an absolute dudzo. So I'm curious to hear you guys talk about the other performances and what you made of them.
I think that those performances are kind of key to figuring out why this movie is structured the way it's structured and why those central characters are the way that they are. The suggestion this movie is making, which is not like a groundbreaking theme, but is like an interesting twist, I think. And the argument that the movie is making is that in this specific milieu of distrust and deception, the only way to actually make a marriage work, a relationship work, is to be exerting steely control at every second, even when no one else is watching. And all 4 of those characters who are played by actors who I agree are giving wildly varying performances, they all share an inability to really keep control at every moment. And they lose themselves, to a drunken comment or a moment of rage or a moment of temptation or the desire to do something that is beyond the bounds of their remit. They don't have steely control, and so they all fall or falter in various ways over the course of this movie, and some of them survive it and some of them don't. I don't think it's a big spoiler to say something like that. But the argument the movie's making, which may or may not result in an interesting movie, is that our two central characters are not everyone else at this agency. They're the only ones who can make it work because they're the only ones who simply would never lie to each other, period.
But they do.
I think the movie's argument is that even the moments in which one of them seems to be deceiving the other are understood at every second by both of them to be a kind of second language that they both understand, but even we, the audience, are not meant to.
Yeah, I guess I like that as an intellectual interpretation of what the hell the point of all this was, which I think not having a sense of that beyond like some of that was mildly suspenseful and fun and entertaining was among my concerns upon departing the film. I guess just the emotional reality of that, like the only way that the most loving, stable relationship here is the one that's the least human and has the least room for human frailty is just like a bleak, weird message that does not square with my sense of reality. So like,
how many British espionage agents do you know?
3 or 4, but yeah.
Look,
I don't know.
I agree that the film could certainly have had more fun with this contrast between them and the other 4 characters. Like it is laying it out like a kind of academic exercise in a way that I think a lot of people might find totally off-putting. But like the George and Martha of it all is funny and could have been funnier. There's like real, like almost sort of S&M vibes that these two exhibit as they're toying with their coworkers in these dinner parties. She's a little dominatrixy. He's got that steely headmaster thing going on with those turtlenecks. And like, there are many opportunities for fun that this movie is totally uninterested in. And I sort of write it off as being a classic case of Soderbergh. Like, this is his second movie in Q1. This is his 14th movie since he declared he was going to retire. He has made probably 11 different sleek, efficient, sexy-ish thrillers in his career. This is like not as good as Out of Sight, but better than Side Effects. And he's already forgotten about it.
So did I. I mean, this is one of those movies that literally I woke up this morning and thought, what movie are we talking about? I saw it last night at 7 p.m.
Dana, does Dan's reading of the film complicate your aversion or admiration or change your take on it at all?
I mean, I don't, to me, it's a classic case of there's not enough there. I think maybe this is just a tossed off one for Soderbergh. I think the biggest mystery to me is why have critics and apparently audiences responded to it so strongly? I don't know in general if this movie's going to be a hit or not, but it doesn't seem like if you went to the movies wanting a shot of sort of James Bond, but more chic as this movie wants to posture itself, that you would be satisfied with the result. But a lot of people seem to be.
I mean, we were the only people in our theater. When I booked the tickets for last night, there was one other seat occupied. And then when we got there, it was just that seat was broken.
It's the kind of movie that you want to succeed. It is absolutely the kind of movie, right? I mean, on paper, it's sort of, right. Oh, it's a spy thriller, but small scale, and it's more about relationships. I mean, it is more about relationships than Spycraft in the sense that a lot of it revolves around this central relationship. The problem is that relationship has no content of any interest that I could find.
It doesn't have the juice.
It's funny. The theaters here were not empty for it. I think maybe I'm realizing that box office is rebounding in LA in a different way than the rest of the world. Or
I think that's almost certainly true.
Probably a checkable fact, but the film going culture is not dead here. I had to get a seat in the second row because the whole theater was full for a Sunday matinee for this. And that's probably what added up to the fairly paltry $7.6 million it made this weekend. So not sure there's going to be major financial encouragement for Soderbergh to make 20 more of these, which means that we'll probably get at least 3 by Christmas.
He doesn't give a shit. He's already probably made 5 more of these.
Exactly. The film is black bag. We were kind of meh on it, but I would say watch it on a plane. It's not the worst use of your 93 minutes. It is the right length. And Cate's clothes are great. And I would say see it for Marissa Abella, who is like going places.
She's great.
That she manages to like breathe warmth and life into this icy thingamajig in kind of an incredible way.
There's nobody out there who doesn't love the good things in life. Everyone loves a little luxury, but it's not always affordable, except when it comes to Quince. Quince is the go-to for luxury essentials at affordable prices. They offer a range of high-quality items at prices within reach, like 100% Mongolian cashmere sweaters, washable silk tops and dresses, organic cotton sweaters, and 14-karat gold jewelry. As listeners to our show know, Steve and I are legit Quince fans. We both have a few items from them that are basics in our wardrobe. I was going to tell a Quince story about one of mine that came up over the weekend. It was a Sunday. I was not going out anywhere or seeing anyone, had just taken a shower and was looking for some snug clothes to wear. And what did I decide to put on with sweatpants? A Quince cashmere sweater, something that I usually save for going out when people are going to see me. But it's such a cozy, comfy, warm, perfect weight sweater that I put it on even though not a single soul was going to lay eyes on me, which I think is a pretty good endorsement for a piece of clothing. Give yourself the luxury you deserve with Quince. Go to quince.com/culture for free shipping on your order and 365-day returns. That's QUINCE.com/culture to get free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/culture.
Imagine what's possible when learning doesn't get in the way of life. At Capella University, our game-changing FlexPath learning format lets you set your own deadlines so you can learn at a time and pace that works for you. It's an education you can tailor to your schedule. That means you don't have to put your life on hold to pursue your professional goals. Instead, enjoy learning your way and earn your degree without missing a beat. A different future is closer than you think with Capella University. Learn more at capella.edu.
Deli Boys is the new crime comedy on Hulu from creator Abdullah Saeed. It features the exploits of two sons who, after their father dies, realize that what they have inherited is not a thriving deli business, but a crime syndicate under investigation by the Federal Bureau of Investigation. In their sort of evolution from useless fail sons to swaggering crime lords, we again encounter a wild cast of characters, including, I think most delightfully, their lucky auntie, played by Purna Jagannathan, who has never not been the most amazing thing in whatever she is in. So I will tip my hand by saying I loved her performance in this. I'm dying to hear what you guys thought of this show and its sort of goofy, exuberant tone. But before we dive in, let's listen to a clip. Here we're going to hear Asif Ali, who plays the buttoned-up son Mir, and Sagar Sheikh, who plays his freewheeling brother Raj, fending off inquiries from FBI agent Mercer at the one remaining deli that has not been seized by the FBI. Mercer is played by Alexandra Ruddy. Let's listen to the clip.
You expect me to believe that you two spoiled brats are actually working here?
Why is everybody being so mean to us today?
Detective ma'am, you know more than anyone that the government has taken everything from us, including my casual tennis clothes.
Yes, so if you don't have a warrant, then we reserve the right to refuse service to anyone.
Guys, I know you're hiding something. Your father was a master criminal. There's no way the two of you could possibly be this stupid.
No!
What?
Nothing? Please continue.
I got a hunch that you Dars are up to something worse than tax fraud.
Ma'am, there is nothing worse than tax fraud.
I suppose we should note that when they go, it's because they've seen a man who they've accidentally shot in the head walking around with a paper bag on his head behind the agent. So just for...
lucky auntie purposefully shot him in the head.
Oh, I forgot. I lost track of who shot who in the head because there's a decent amount of that for a show with the tone that you just heard there. Dan, what did you think of Deli Boys?
Well, that's a great segue into what I thought about Deli Boys, which is it is such an interesting and challenging experiment in tone. It is very funny and very Philly in like a scrappy, goofy way. There's a whole episode revolving around a Super Bowl party where everyone's going crazy for the Eagles and wearing the worst, stupidest Eagles wear. And yet it's also sort of an anti-hero drama in which we are meant to be at least a tiny bit invested in the success of these two idiot losers in becoming the cocaine kingpins of Philadelphia. I found, as much as I enjoyed the show, I often found that tone a little jarring, and I'm interested in unpacking it. And so I have some questions for you guys. Do you feel we were meant to root for them? And if so, what are we meant to be rooting for them to do? To become drug kingpins, or to help that nice FBI agent who is beset at all sides by idiots in her investigation? To reject their father's legacy or to embrace it? What do you think we are meant to be hoping for?
Yeah, Dan, I ended up watching the entire season, all 10 episodes, mainly because I wanted to answer that question. Also because it's enjoyable. It goes down easy. Each episode is about 23 minutes long or something. And it's packed with silly dialogue and funny slapstick. And I agree, Julia, that Poorna Jagannathan is the best thing as their aunt in the series. But it was the tone and the instability of the tone that kept me watching, because I wanted to see, is there an arc? And specifically, is there sort of a moral arc for either of these brothers or any of the characters who are involved in the Deli gang wars? The show obviously is paying a big debt and homage and sometimes a spoof to gangster classics and to Scorsese and Tarantino and filmmakers who are interested in the netherworld. But the most interesting thing about those kinds of explorations of the netherworld, and this is why I think ultimately Scorsese's more interesting at doing them than Tarantino, is that they ask those questions, Dan. They ask those questions about, who do we root for? Are we excited that the brothers are getting better at becoming ruthless drug runners and potentially killers? And are we supposed to scoff at their fantasies? There's some kind of dream sequences where, for example, Mir, the more nerdy of the two brothers, is living out his Godfather fantasy and dispensing largesse to people in the neighborhood. And is that a fantasy that we're supposed to identify with or to worry for Mir because he is going down that path in his own mind? I'm not sure that this show is entirely clear on that. And I don't think that by episode 10, it asks those questions urgently enough for me to feel good about watching it. But that said, there's so much about it that's clever and funny and just has forward motion that it's also hard to stop watching.
Yeah, I watched the whole thing too. And I think the some of the best parts of the show are its like dual cultural specificities, right? It's really specifically about being part of a Pakistani immigrant family and community, and then really specifically about living in Philly, particularly. And like, I'm not Philly enough to call bullshit on the different references, but they have the weight of just particular observation. So there's something really sharp and grounded in the authenticity of those two worlds and their portrayals. And then, of course, there's always something exciting and fun about a show that is offering a representation of a community. But the point of it is not, look, I'm representing this community. It's like, let's take this community and this town of Philly as a starting point and then just tell a completely kind of story that's almost independent of that and see what magic we can make out of the different juxtapositions. And there's just so many great, particular jokes or references or cameos from different performers that animate the whole proceedings that also, along with the comedic momentum, I think just kind of keeps the show, like provides some grounding for the show that its sense of morality does not. So I think that's also part of what the tonal stew is very goofy. I think it succeeds in making you care about the central relationships between the characters, right? These two brothers who have kind of odd couple energy, who squabble but who love each other. Their auntie figure who has who's kind of charismatic and terrifying, and it emerges over the season, really does feel a duty of care towards them and really loves them and is trying to help them navigate their father's death in this confusing world they find themselves in. But the things that I struggle with are the cavalierness about the violence. Like, yeah, we are sort of at the end kind of like cheering Mira on for having like developed the self-esteem to pull off a, to successfully be a crime lord. It's like, why are we clap, 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 clap? Like, I guess,
I mean, hats off to the show for using comedy to turn us into bad fans, to use the Nussbaumian construct.
Yeah. And then there's also just so like, if in a world where you want us to believe in all of that emotional development, then there's just so much plot packed into the back half of the season that part almost goes too fast as well, I think. But I don't know. I also felt it was really like, I'm glad I watched it. I'm not sure. I think it goes in the pantheon of all-time greats, or let me stipulate, I'm sure that it doesn't. But I don't know. I'm glad I watched it. It's really unusual, and there's a lot of really fun and funny stuff in it. And so, even though
a lot of it that comes down to the actors, as you say, Purna Jagannathan is really fucking great in this show. I knew her from Never Have I Ever. I know she's been in a lot of other things where she's also been very good, but that is a totally fun role with hidden depths. And to see all these actors, there's like a funny interview with the two main guys who talk about how nice it was to have a show where they could both be cast, because typically it's just they're competing against each other for every Indian or Pakistani role in any TV show or Hollywood production. And right down to like the guy who plays Lucky Auntie's rival, Brian George, previously best known to me as Babu Bhatt from Seinfeld, the guy who runs the Pakistani restaurant across the street that Seinfeld shuts down. Like that, all these actors are getting such fun, comedically rich, often quite silly roles is a thing about this show that is delightful, and they all definitely like make a total meal out of everything that they're given. And then the two brothers, Mir and Raj, who are played by Asif Ali and Sagar Shaikh, are, you call them an odd couple vibe. I think of them really as a Harold and Kumar vibe, the very straight-laced careerist one who went to Drexel Business School, and then the pothead, spacey, but incredibly confident one. I found those performances really appealing too. And they often overcame my sort of queasiness about the tonal weirdness of it just through like sheer charisma and winningness. And because it's hard not to care about these babes in the woods, even when the woods are like a little ridiculous or stupid. But what did you guys think of those two main characters and that brotherly relationship?
Yeah, I think that's what keeps it afloat. Both actors are great. Their chemistry is awesome. They're very funny together, almost like a sketch comedy team. There's an extremely silly moment where, as a crucial moment of violence is about to take place or not take place, they start arguing about whether it's worth subscribing to AMC Plus in order to get Better Call Saul. And Mir, the straight-laced one, is shouting, "But I already subscribed to Amazon, just on principle. I'm not subscribing on top." It's really absurd. But yeah, it's sort of that level of like badinage on top of, moments of violence that is both the show's potential downfall, because it is kind of morally queasy, and it's where some of its best humor derives from.
Yeah. I mean, it really is. It's like, what if Breaking Bad, but all the violence was just Looney Tunes violence, so you didn't care.
Right.
And maybe that's okay. I mean, it does sort of have this kind of alternate reality, 30 Rock-ish tone of like nothing is quite real and the stakes don't matter. But then the emotional stakes of like grieving a dad you maybe never really knew and trying to find your way in the world with your misfit brother and your terrifying and protective auntie. Like those emotional stakes are kind of grounded, and then the sort of cultural references are very grounded. So the whole thing is like a very unusual souffle. But I will say 2 of 3 of the panelists, despite all of this quibbling and caveating, watched the whole damn thing.
Yeah, I feel like that's like an incredible, like the average number of episodes watched per Gabfester is off the charts.
Yeah. So maybe this is the best thing we've ever talked about. Just based on sheer watchability.
I mean, yes, this question of where does the realism lie is a funny thing to think about with this show. And it's funny to think about what is the difference between this and an anti-hero drama. What is an anti-hero comedy? That's what this is essentially trying to create. It's too light and funny for the kind of like horrified fascination that I would watch The Sopranos or Breaking Bad with. It doesn't actually have any of like the necessary realism about the drug business that would make me think it was ever remotely possible that these two idiots would run the Philly cocaine, world. But so it's a kind of experiment in how far can you push the unreality of the plot while making the emotional stakes and the milieu, as you say, Julia, really, really specific and gripping. And will people go along for the ride, even though the stuff happening on the edges of the ride is completely out of scale and out of and not even in the same reality as what's happening in the middle of it.
Yeah. And I think the last piece of it that it often is really smart about that we didn't get to is sort of power dynamics within all these groups. So even though the central power dynamic that these two nudniks would ever possibly become crime kingpins, which is just like, the answer is obviously no on its face. And so the whole thing seems crazy. The subtlety with which within the different crime orgs, they talk about who gets power and who gets respect and how women are treated and how race comes into it. And like there's, I don't know, just the blend of the hyper real and the hyper cartoonish makes for something really kind of unusual and pretty snackable. So the show is Deli Boys. It's on Hulu. It goes down easy. Check it out. For our final topic this week, we're going to chat with Dan Kois about a piece he recently wrote for Slate marking the 25th anniversary of Dave Eggers's A Heartbreaking Work of Staggering Genius, a memoir that was fairly unusual in its approach and extremely unusual in its massive, mind-boggling success. Dan, maybe take us through the contours of that success. Some of our listeners, I'm sure, will remember it well, and some of them were maybe not born yet. So remind people what happened 25 years ago when this book came out and why it was such a sensation. And then tell us a little bit about why you wanted to revisit it now.
It's a real micro-generational landmark, and everyone I've heard from who had strong feelings about this book and who was waiting for a piece like this, even if they didn't know it, was basically within 3 years of my age in either direction. The book came out in 1999. It had the kind of incredible full court press of combined mainstream media hype and underground rabble-rousing fan building that is, like the pipe dream of a publicist in the year 2025. This kind of combination of successes that basically doesn't exist now. But the guy was Eggers, who was a extremely obscure, except in media gossip circles, magazine editor and occasional writer. This was his first book. He was profiled in the New York Times, New York Magazine, and the Washington Post. There's a 6,000 word excerpt in the New Yorker alongside like a big photograph of him and his friends with a whole thing about how cool and awesome they were. And everyone was talking about it and gossiping about it. It was on the bestseller list, the Times bestseller list all summer. And then when the paperback came out the next spring, it was a number one New York Times bestseller for about 6 months. Like it topped the bestseller list for a long, long time. And it really was, I think, a signal book for people right about my age, right at the age where we were trying to figure out, oh, what is my role in the world? How can I be a creative person? And how can I make my mark on things? Because this was a book about and by a guy who was desperate to make his mark on things, but who, over the course of the year and a half of this book's monstrous success, instantly realized that it was the worst thing that had ever happened to him, and his fame instantly curdled and turned horrible. And so there was a couple of interesting lessons were being learned, at least by me. And 25 years later, I've thought about this book a lot, and I've sort of wanted to write about it. And I've been interested by how far it's fallen out of the cultural conversation. I don't really hear anyone talking about it anymore, perhaps because the micro generation it appealed to was pretty limited at the start. But, I was thinking about it in January, and all of a sudden I realized that the literal 25th anniversary of the book was coming up in a month, and no one was doing anything about it as far as I could tell. And so I wanted to write about not only what the book was and what it meant, but also sort of why no one was writing about it, and why the book had sort of evaporated, which has to do a little bit with my microgeneration and also a little bit with how much Dave Eggers hates its success.
Do you have a sense of that it is still, I think you're right that it's not talked about so much anymore, and that there has not been much hullabaloo about its anniversary besides your piece. Do you have the sense that it's like taught or read, that people are assigned it, or?
I don't think so. I know one, Matt Clam, who's a friend of mine and a novelist, tells me that he teaches it and that students really like it. I don't think it's really big in the academic or the creative writing world. It sells about 2,000 copies a year, which, I'd take that. But compared with what it was selling at its peak, and the way that the other big, huge books of 25 or 50 or 75 years ago typically are selling on a backlist basis today, is like nothing. The book, of course, presents itself in many funny ways with the expectation that it will instantly become a classic from its title, its sort of faux grandiose, but not actually faux at all title, to the little addenda and jokes inside it where he literally asks, you're probably reading this in the future because the book is taught in all the schools. And seeing a book that is grappling with literary fame even before it achieved literary fame creates like a funny kind of vertigo when you're reading it now, especially when you know where the fame went. But I'm very curious. You guys are sort of my microgeneration. What did this book mean to you guys, if anything, when you read it in 1999 or 2000? How much of an impact did it make on you? And have you thought about it for the last 25 years?
Yeah, I don't know, first of all, about the generational argument, whether I'm quite this book's generation. I certainly do remember the hullabaloo, and it was because of the hullabaloo that I read the book at the time. But as I've said before on the show, I always do sort of feel like professionally I am a millennial because I spent so long in grad school that I went out on the job market at the same time as people a decade younger than me. And I read this book with the exact same reasoning or same mood and approach toward it as Eat, Pray, Love, which was another, I think a few years later, but another, massive bestseller that everyone was talking about to the point that it became annoying. And I sort of thought, fine, I'll read the book. And in both cases, I remember thinking, all right, I have to hand it to this author. This very specific niche thing that they're trying to do, they pulled off and they turned it into a page turner and, a book that, though it may not live on forever as a classic, is a book of the moment that it makes sense that it's a hit. I think, although Dan, you're more of a book critic guy than me who's read a lot more contemporary memoirs, so maybe you can speak to this, but it seems like part of what was so unusual and appealing about the book at the time was the innovation with which it explored the category of memoir, right? I mean, it's the memoir of a person who on paper would seem too young to have written a memoir, especially at the time when, it wasn't a rite of passage for young writers to write memoirs. And it's a memoir, as you say in your essay about it. It's a memoir that in some ways is about an unusual life, a life that sets itself apart in a way that even a young person would be entitled to write their memoir, in that the Eggers family lost both parents at a very young age and in a very tragic and sudden way. Both their parents died of cancer within 1 month of each other, which he narrates in pretty harrowing detail at the beginning of the book. And that puts their young family in this unusual situation that reminds me of the TV show of the same era, Party of Five, right?
Yeah.
Like the young orphans who are kind of bringing each other up, even though they're not grown up yet themselves. But that's only, as you also say in your essay, the first 109 pages of the book. And I know that exact number because Dave Eggers himself says in the extensive meta-fictional acknowledgments that after page 109, his book goes downhill. And certainly after that, page, it stops being about this extraordinary tragic circumstance of the Eggers family and starts to be about Dave Eggers as a young adult, trying things, failing, having a somewhat normal life for somebody of that generation.
It starts being about him having a normal life that's still somewhat unusual because he's raising a teenager, and also because he believes himself at the time to be exceptional and that he believes himself to be made for exceptional things.
Right. But this kind of goes to what I'm saying about the meta memoir category that it belongs to. And it seems to me that the 21st century has seen a boom in memoirs. This is where you, the book critic, can come in and say, no, not at all. But I feel like every writer of some distinction now has to write a memoir at some point, no matter what their age is or what their life experiences have been. It just seems like it's more acceptable now for a young person who might be seen as fairly inexperienced and maybe not having earned their chops as having had this long weathered life to write a memoir. And I think maybe part of why that happened is because Dave Eggers did it, and he did it in a big and bold way while owning on the page the unusual fact that he was somewhat young and inexperienced to be doing this.
Right. And that, as he says a number of times, we all agree that there are just too many memoirs out there already. The book came out a couple of years into what I think publishing thought of as like the first boom in memoir, which, is the time of Mary Karr and The Liars Club. Her follow-up to The Liars Club came out the same year as Heartbreaking Work. And there was this sense that suddenly people were writing books, were writing autobiography, but they weren't, whatever. They weren't Jimmy Carter. They were...
Yeah, you didn't have to be an important statesman or something.
Right. They weren't worthy of an autobiography. What they had was either an interesting story or an extremely particular perspective or voice. And that's what Eggers brought. And a lot of the boom in memoir since Eggers has come about for, I think, a really simple and great reason, which is that publishing has realized how valuable it is to tell a lot of different kinds of stories from a lot of different kinds of perspectives. And that means that even if you are young and not famous, if you have led a particularly interesting life and also are writing from a cultural perspective that is not out there a lot, people really want to read that, and there's real value in telling those stories. Now, Eggers' cultural perspective is about as white bread, as it can be. He's a suburban Chicago kid who is entitled, just like every other white guy raised upper middle class of that era, exactly like me. And he nonetheless spun it into something unique and unusual because his voice was so particular, because he was so determined to interrogate his own need to tell his own story at every step of the way.
I remember reading it. So I moved to New York City to join the publishing industry the year it came out, having attended a program that trained young college graduates in either book or magazine publishing. And so, this could not have been more pitched to my exact demographic. What are you, young literary person, going to do in the world? Here's this young dynamo who's made something important and that everyone's excited about. So I remember when it came out feeling like, aha, the generational torch is being passed to us, the youngs, and we're going to do cool things. I felt sort of identified with it a little bit, and maybe a little suspicious of its success because I was a skeptical little contrarian then, even before I had joined Slate. And I remember reading it and then just being impressed by the bravura of it. All of that hyperactive, metafictional bullshit shouldn't work, but it does. I remember.
It really does.
I'm curious. I'm so you talk about it some in your piece, but I'm curious for you to talk about it a little bit here, what it was like to go back, whether it ages well enough. But the sort of frenetic playfulness paired with the truly tragic story, paired with the kind of generic strivings of a generic person who thinks he's exceptional, maybe is demonstrating his exceptionalness by his exceptional ability to stitch all these things together in a way that works. I remember being very impressed by it and sort of treating it as important totem in my mind of a thing that can happen in the world. And But then basically really not thinking about it much again since then, and sort of, I don't know, and sort of, respecting what Eggers has done with that, with the money he earned and the work he's done setting up a, tutoring program, writing training program for young people, and with the Believer magazine, and maybe taking issue with some of his sort of anti-critical stances, like I never knew exactly how much to associate the Believer's famous anti-snark position with Eggers's.
They come straight out of his experiences.
Rejection of criticism from his experience of having this work written about, despite being largely adored. But obviously, I believe in criticism, or I wouldn't be doing this show still after all these years. So, there's some philosophical daylight there.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I mean, I've followed his work since, admired a lot of what he's done with it, had questions about other pieces of it. But basically, I think, like Dana, I just found that the book worked. But I'm so curious whether it still does now, like that kind of frantic crenellation type of structure for writing is just much less in vogue. Does it still work? Like, you reread it, you talk about it a bit in the piece, but is it still good?
It really is. Like, sort of to my surprise, it's the awe and love that I had for this book at age, 24 or 25 is exactly the kind of warning sign that, now 50-year-old me would take to say, boy, look out, when you revisit this, you're going to find all kinds of problems with it. The thing I was sort of most surprised was, I wasn't really surprised that the first couple of chapters about the deaths of his parents, which are movingly and beautifully and complicatedly written, I guess those would still work. But I had basically forgotten what the whole rest of the book was about, or what it even was. And I was really surprised how much the energy of the prose and the critical nature of Eggers' point of view on that story really kept it lively and moving. The book is full of like a 28-year-old's total and utter contempt for his 23-year-old self. I think he views 23-year-old Eggers as, somewhat laudable for taking care of his little brother, although even that is complicated in a lot of ways. But he mostly feels that he's kind of like a thirsty fame monster he's unbelievably embarrassed by. And he views the goal of essentially the entire second half of the book as exposing that monstrous character for the entire world to see, as a kind of punishment, as he would later say in interviews, for having survived. And that's really like striking to come across in a memoir. It's despite its title and despite its opening and its meta playfulness, it is about the least self-aggrandizing memoir I can imagine, and it's legitimately self-lacerating. And I recognize that too. And I think what I liked about it now was recognizing that it took me a long time to feel a sort of grudging affection for the monster that I was in my mid-20s. And I don't know how Eggers feels about that version of himself now, but watching someone struggle so painfully with the person that he was just so recently, I found a really unique reading experience. I hope that Eggers has come to some peace about who he was in that era. Certainly the level to which in the immediate aftermath of the book, he found the whole thing miserable and awful, and the way that he is not interested in talking about or even thinking about or this book or having it in the limelight at all, even now, suggests that he still feels a great deal of pain about the entire experience.
Dan, you write in your essay that no book has ever made me want to write the way this book did, which I wrote down in its entirety because I wanted to ask you about it. And especially with what you were just saying about looking back at one's despicable mid-20s self, I want to know, what would 25-year-old you think of 50 20-year-old you who has now written many books and is a writer for a living and has achieved that goal. I mean, how do you feel now about the fact that this is the book that made you want to write?
He would be very upset that hair transplant technology had not advanced in any way that he could have done something good about it. The book is unique in that it is so scornful of young Eggers' ambition, and yet among people my age who got passionately involved in this book, they recognize that. I recognize that. And nevertheless, I came out of that book being like, I also want to change the world. I also want to write things that matter and tell stories that are true and make big mistakes, as Eggers refers in the front matter to the paperback when he sort of gives his last word on the book. I don't know how to square that circle exactly. Why did I respond in that exact way? I think 25-year-old me would be amazed that I had managed to write as much as I have managed to write, and also dismayed at how the word rates have gone down.
All right. Well, the book is a heartbreaking work of staggering genius. The piece is Dan Coyce's. Dave Eggers' heartbreaking work of staggering genius was a sensation, then gone. What happened? Dan, so fun to talk to you about this. I'm glad you went back to revisit.
Thanks, guys.
Meghan Trainor, laundry retrainer.
Meghan Trainor? You're tossing out my gunky laundry detergent bottle?
Ooh-wee, it's got that booty, that juicy boom boom, that gon' ride all right.
Arm & Hammer Power Sheets. Toss like this.
'Cause I toss like this, I wash like this. It's a no mess laundry bliss. Arm & Hammer Power Sheets. More power to you.
My dad works in B2B marketing. He came by my school for career day and said he was a big ROAS man. Then he told everyone how much he loved calculating his return on ad spend. My friends still laugh at me to this day.
Not everyone gets B2B, but with LinkedIn, you'll be able to reach people who do. Get a $100 credit on your next ad campaign. Go to linkedin.com/results to claim your credit. That's linkedin.com/results. Terms and conditions apply. LinkedIn, the place to be.
At Sierra, discover great deals on top brand workout gear, like high-quality walking shoes, which might lead to another discovery.
40,000 steps, baby. Who's on top now, Karen?
You've taken the office step challenge a step too far. Don't worry, though. Sierra also has yoga gear. It might be a good place to find your zen. Discover top brands at unexpectedly low prices. Sierra, let's get moving.
Dana, now is the moment in our show for some business. What have we got?
Yes, Julia, our only item of business this week is to tell our listeners about what's coming up in the Slate Plus bonus episode. Today, all three of us, Julia, Dan, and I, will discuss our feelings on table salt. We read a piece about salt and trends in salting in both home cooking and restaurant cooking in The Atlantic. So today, all three of us will discuss our feelings about table salt. Are they all the same? Do you use different ones for cooking and for sitting at the table? Are you a salt snob? If you're a Slate Plus member, you will hear that as a separate episode in your feed. And if you're not a Slate Plus member, you can become one by signing up at slate.com/culture plus. In exchange for your membership dollars, you get ad-free podcasts, you get bonus segments like the one I just described, and many other shows have them too. And best of all, you get unlimited access to all the writing and all the podcasting on slate.com. These memberships are what keep the magazine afloat. So please, if you haven't, consider signing up today at slate.com/culture plus. Once again, that's slate.com/culture plus, or you can subscribe on Apple Podcasts or Spotify by clicking try free at the top of our show page.
It's endorsement time. And as is our custom on this show, I will begin with Dana.
Yes, I have an endorsement this week that I'm really excited about. It's one of the most exciting shows I've discovered in a long time. And finally, my spouse and I have a show that we're equally excited to sit down and make our way through. And also, it's an extremely long show in the best way. It has many, many seasons. I believe it has something like 11 seasons. So it's sort of scrolling endlessly out before us. Have either of you heard about this French show? It ran from 2009 to 2017 called A French Village.
Nope.
Nary a word? No. All right. So this is a show that was a big hit in France and I think all around Europe. It was recommended to me very strongly many times over the last 5 years or so by my sister, by my mom, by various friends. And it was always sort of hard to picture exactly what the show was. But now that we've gotten into it, this show has become my new obsession. So A French Village takes place in
a Scottish city.
Brigadoon. It's a village that appears and disappears. So the show is set in, surprise, a French village, a fictional town called Villeneuve that's in Vichy, France during World War II. And that is the entire substance of the show. It begins at the beginning of the occupation. So I think it starts in 1941. And it's going to move through the rest of the war. And there's a lot of characters. You know everybody in this village. You know the town doctor, the industrialist, the various Nazis who are occupying the village, the school teacher, the schoolmaster. It takes quite a while. Like you have to have 4 or 5 episodes worth of not at all boring, but sort of somewhat demanding introduction of characters so that you know the, dozen or so people, and the number will grow as the show goes on, that the story revolves around. And it ends up paying off so hugely because it's a show about so much more than just sort of wartime subsistence, which is the main material of the show, sort of how the black market works in the village, what starts happening to the Jewish population. All of that is covered. But at the same time, you get to know these characters so well that it's sort of like, what's going on with the doctor's marriage? Oh no, who's having an affair with the postal lady? And is she secretly in the resistance? And there's so many extramarital affairs. It's very French. The kids are great characters and you see them grow over the course of the seasons. So it's a big investment to start watching this show, but it could not be more timely. It's all about collaboration, resistance, what those things mean, what kind of moral compromises you make when living in an occupied country. The Nazis are real characters, which is not to say that they're empathetic characters necessarily, but they're far more than just mustache twirling villains. They're people who have different backgrounds, different motivations. It's just extraordinary. It's a really, really rich show. Also, if you know any French, it's super, super fun. Just to, of course, it's subtitled. It's on Amazon Prime, but it's really fun to just sort of follow the language because it's beautifully written. Anyway, I couldn't recommend it more highly. A French Village, if you want to just get a show that you and your significant other can meld with the couch while you watch it over a series of months, this is the one.
Wow. All right. That does sound good. I still have not seen Le Bureau, so I feel like the list of French shows I need to catch up on is growing, but
I know that show is much beloved. I personally felt like one season was enough and I got it. This is so much richer and bigger than The Bureau, I think. And again, yeah, it's just surprisingly apposite for this moment in history.
11 seasons.
Or maybe it's 10, but as all listeners to this show know, usually I like TV shows to be as short and sweet as possible. Yeah. Like I'm brutalized by overly long shows that go on season after season. But in the case of this one, we're almost saving it and trying to pace out the episodes slower because we don't want it to end.
What season are you on of the 10 to 11?
I think I've been waiting to endorse it till I was well enough into it to really speak to it. I think we're somewhere in the midst of 4 or early 5. One thing I don't like about it is it doesn't have the little summaries at the beginning. You really have to sort of keep track of many, many characters and their machinations because it does not provide those little American bite-sized summaries of what came the week before.
Previously on.
À la dernière, a French village.
All right, Dan, what have you got to bring our listeners today?
I am recommending a novel, also a little rural and peaceful at first, called Stoneyard Devotional. It's by Charlotte Wood. It was a shortlist novel for the Booker Prize this year. It got published in America maybe a month or so ago. It is set in a remote religious community in rural Australia, and it follows a burned out middle-aged environmental activist who she needs a retreat. She needs to get away from what she feels is sort of the failure of her life, and she goes there for what she thinks will be a week, and then she ends up staying and living there. She finds herself sort of bemusedly loving it in this place. The plot of the book, such as it is is sort of about a terrible mouse infestation at this retreat, which definitely made me never want to live in rural Australia, but it's incredible to read about. But the spiritual journey of the book is just really gorgeous and fascinating. It moves slowly and sedately. It's not 11 seasons, though maybe it feels like it. But I really loved it a lot. A really remarkable book, I thought. And once again, that's Stoneyard Devotional by Charlotte Wood.
Amazing. I come bearing something that will take less of your time than an 11-season TV show or an entire novel. It is merely an article in the Los Angeles Times by the wonderful food critic there, Bill Addison. It's called I'm a Martini Purist. Here's what is and isn't in the perfect classic cocktail. I'm not much of a cocktail person. I've probably only had like 20 martinis in my life, although I've enjoyed them greatly. And this is just a really, really beautifully, precisely written, almost philosophically written treatise on what a martini is, why it's such an iconic cocktail, and what makes a great one great. I learned a ton from reading it. I just want to read a brief paragraph here. What is the perfect martini? No such thing exists because perfection is inert and a martini is anything but. Like a pizza, the martini dies a quick death. The first sip is everything, and then the temperature rises, and the proportions measured by human hands will be different every time, however microscopically. Its existence hinges on variability, but it's the reach for perfection that gives this jumble of complex flavors its lasting mystique. Then he goes on to tell a story about a bartender who described being taught at a closed bar one night to make a martini by a master bartender who had him just mix 47 martinis in a row. And then on the 47th martini finally said, that's close, taste that, remember that. And so it's just a great reported critical essay about the beauty of a perfect martini.
The Stanley Kubrick of cocktails.
Yeah, I don't know. I can't drink the hard stuff very often at my advanced age, but I do like martinis, and to the degree that I like them, I like vodka martinis, but this is all about how if you're a real martini person, you got to drink a gin martini. And I do also like gin, but not in martinis. So maybe I need to reconsider everything.
Maybe you've just previously have drunk the 46 not good enough martinis and you need to find the perfect one.
Yeah, I did finally figure out a martini order, which I think is a place to get to in your martini drinking, because having uncertainty about the martini order takes the polish off of the elan of drinking the martini. So I've gone that far. We'll see if I go further down the road. But the piece again is I'm a Martini Purist. Here's what is and isn't in the perfect classic cocktail by Bill Addison at the LATimes. And we'll post a link on our show page.
But Julie, before you wrap endorsements, I have an embarrassed fact check. A French Village only ran for 7 seasons, which I Googled while we were talking about it because 11 did seem excessive. I think that was just my wishful thinking because I would like it to continue unfolding, but there will be 4 less than I just promised all of our listeners.
Frankly, that made me more likely to watch it.
I will still say the Martini article is shorter, but by less. All right. Well, thank you so much, Dan, for sitting in for Steve today.
My plaisir.
And Dana, thank you as always.
Yes, I loved it.
You'll find links to some of the things we talked about today on our show page at slate.com/culturefest, and you can email us at culturefest@slate.com. Our introductory theme music is by the composer Nicholas Bertel. Our producer today is Vic Whitley-Berry, and they also provided research assistance for us. For Dan Coyce and Dana Stevens, I'm Julia Turner. We'll see you next week.
For a limited time at Verizon, you can get our best price ever for a single line. Just $45 per month when you bring your phone, which is less than you spend on Too Tired to Cook takeout every week. Get 1 line on Unlimited Welcome for $45 per month with autopay plus taxes and fees. Visit your local Verizon store by April 2nd to save. $20 monthly promo credits applied over 36 months with a new line on Unlimited Welcome. In times of congestion, unlimited 5G and 4G LTE may be temporarily slower than other traffic. Domestic data roaming at 2G speeds. Additional terms apply.